Hello, everyone. On June 29th, we had the pleasure of a virtual visit from author Krista Foss to help us launch our 2021 Adult Summer Reading Challenge. If you're not familiar with the Summer Reading Challenge, it's where adults and members of the library can win gift certificates by reading and submitting book reviews and by attending and participating in library programs and events like this one. If you want to know more, please follow the links in the description. Krista Foss is the author of the novels Half-Life and Smoke River. Her short fiction has appeared in several Canadian journals, as well as Granta in the UK, and has twice been a finalist for the Journey Prize. Her essay writing has been published in Best Canadian Essays and won the Prism International Creative Nonfiction Prize in 2016. Smoke River also won the Hamilton Literary Award and was optioned for a film by Westwood Productions. She lives in Hamilton, Ontario, with the Brantford Public Library. We were happy to welcome Krista Foss.
Thank you, everyone, tonight, and thank you to the Brantford Public Library. It's a real pleasure to be here. I just wanted to start off by acknowledging what a heavy time it is for us in Canada. Everything that is going on, all the things that need to be reckoned with in terms of our colonial past and in terms of current things that are happening with residential school survivors and the discovery of remains at residential schools. In addition to that, to incidents of Islamophobia and also other incidents of sort of racialized hate. So there's a lot to deal with. In addition to that, we've got massive heat waves everywhere. And some of you are probably coming out of an incredible storm system that just moved through Hamilton and Brantford. So I just want to acknowledge that it probably feels like a strange time to be talking about fiction and reading and novels. But there is a way I think that we can use our reading to empower us and to help us navigate with our own responses to everything that's happening. So tonight, I'm going to talk about 3 ideas in my own reading and writing, and specifically the writing of this book, Half-Life, and they are tension, intention, and attention. And then I'll pivot back and talk a little bit at the end about reading, because I think it's a really important subject for us right now. So I thought I would start with tension. And I'm going to start in a funny place to be talking about tension, because we know we love tension in stories. But I'm going to talk about tension in libraries because I love libraries, and I have spent a lot of my life in them, as many of you have. And I just want to talk about the idea of something sort of unexpected. And here's my story of tension in libraries. I grew up in a very small town, and I went to a very small elementary school that didn't have its own dedicated library. So it had a classroom. They threw some stacks in there, threw some books in there, and then they gave us a library teacher, Mrs. Shaver. And Mrs. Shaver was she was this amazing woman. She just always stood with her legs akimbo. She wore Dr. Scholl's sandals in the winter and the summer. She had this sort of Brillo pad hair and kitty cat glasses. And she just had this look on her face like she was ready to rumble. And all these sort of highly energetic kids would come to library class and have to sit on the floor and listen to her talk about the Dewey Decimal System or read from a book. And if we acted up, Mrs. Shaver had 2 punishments. This makes me sound like I'm really, really old, but one was the hot seat and one was the cooler. And the hot seat was this crack in the terrazzo floor of our classroom. It was right beside her desk. And so the boiler room was underneath this classroom. So if you sat on that crack was very, very hot. So that was one way, you would be made to settle down. And the other one was the cooler. And the cooler was this vestibule on the side of the classroom that was uninsulated. In the winter, it was freezing cold and you'd get locked in there. So it sounds almost medieval, but this did happen. I grew up in a long time ago. But the thing about this that was unexpected was Mrs. Shaver made the library class super exciting. And the other way that she made it exciting was she had a rule. And the rule was you couldn't read outside of your grade level. And that might have had something to do with a shortage of books or whatever. But of course, it made reading outside of your grade level extremely exciting. And so we'd get into the stacks and you'd immediately try to pivot and find the book that you weren't supposed to read. And you were trying to evade Mrs. Shaver because she was just like a Death Star. She would find you, she was moving the staff, she'd turn around and there she would be. And I think that fact that it made library class kind of dangerous and exciting, in fact, the most exciting class of my week, has always stuck with me, as a wonderful kind of tension, and a way that I view libraries. Later, when I was very sort of self-conscious high school student, I ended up going to a massive high school. So this was very big. And walking into the cafeteria would just put me into a full flop sweat. My head would get dizzy. I couldn't eat in there. So I ate every single one of my lunches in the library, of course, which was absolutely forbidden to bring food into the library for the first couple of years of high school. But all those sort of evasive tactics that Mrs. Shaver had taught me served me well. And one thing that happened was, in order to hide my food, I had to open up some really big, heavy textbooks. And that was also kind of an exciting reading experience, and opened up my world even more. So this idea of an unexpected tension, a tension in an unexpected place, we wouldn't expect that in libraries, kind of informed a lot of what I do in writing and what happened with this novel. My story is about a middle-aged woman. She's a physics teacher in a high school. She's a single mom. She has a teenage daughter who's being cagey about her plans. She has an aging mother who is formidable, who she calls the Lily. And she has these accomplished siblings who are coming back to the town where she lives, in the same city as her mother, but her siblings have gone off. They're coming back for a reunion, and it's on the centenary of their father, who passed away a quarter century earlier, of what would be his birth. And they're going to dedicate a gallery in the local art museum because he was a designer of mid-century modern furniture. And so part of what and part of what her journey is that she has an kind of an unrecognized trauma that her siblings never believed. They never they never accepted her truth. And yet she remained loving her siblings and adoring them, but they never accepted it. So she has it in her head that this reunion will be the time in which she confronts them about this. So there's a tension there. Part of the unexpected tension of the book is one of the ways that she's dealing with this idea of truth and belief is through physics. And in particular, she talks to dead physicists that she believes she has a connection to. So that's the story. The second idea that I was going to talk about tonight is intention. Often yoga teachers will start a class and say, set an intention for your practice. With writing, that can be good. And that doesn't always necessarily happen, though. Sometimes the unintended is the productive place. And this book was unintended. It was an unintended book. I had lost two siblings in a very short period of time, in 4 years, and they both died of after battles with cancer. And cancer's the disease. I mean, nobody expects that disease to afflict people in their lives. And both of my siblings were athletic, and they were non-drinkers and non-smokers, and they were healthy, but it just happened, right? Both of them were parents of children going into high school, children just coming out of high school. And when my brother died, I had this overwhelming sense of grief. But in the midst of that grief was this other thing about my own unrecognized trauma within the family that he and I could never have a conversation about. And so in the midst of the grief, it was this other feeling of kind of anger, which felt unspeakable and kind of shameful in the midst of grieving and surrounded by grieving people who'd now lost, two major figures in our family life. At the same time, I had finished a novel draft that I'd been working for 4 years, and I'd given it to my daughter, and she had the uncomfortable sort of job of telling me that it was a disaster, that it just wasn't working as a story, which was a really difficult thing to do. But she did say to me in the process of that, she said, you should write about what's going on with you right now. because it seems to also be a story sniffing around the edge of this manuscript. So it was entirely unintended, and I was panicked about writing about it because I felt like I was writing about something very intimate. So I sort of dove into it. What happened in that process, though, was really productive because, of course, from the unintended came the intention. And the intention very quickly was the fictionalization of the characters, and making them kind of walk beyond my lived experience into their own backstories, their own way of navigating the world, their own way of navigating this idea of truth and belief. And so the story, in a wonderful way, kind of walked out and then walked away from me. The first iteration I wrote very, very quickly. And then other iterations were not as quick. So at the same time as this was happening, and kind of part of the existing novel was this another unintended thing happened. I had been working on a screenplay. I needed to get visuals. I ended back up in the library, our public library, and I was looking for books on Arctic animals. And so I ended up in the Arctic animal section of the public library of wildlife. And I was looking for a book on polar bears, quite frankly. But sticking out right where the polar bear book should be was another book, face forward, on the Danish resistance in World War II. And it was just so odd that I picked it up and I started to read, and I read the whole thing in the afternoon. I forgot about the polar bears. And in that book, I stumbled on this apocryphal story of the great Danish physicist Niels Bohr during German-occupied Denmark in World War II. His whole office and home was occupied by this Gestapo. I mean, he was part of an effort around the making of the bomb. And so they were very interested in him and his work. And he had bottles of heavy water. And the apocryphal story is that he eventually had to escape because they were circling in on him, and he escaped to neutral Sweden, but he left behind these bottles of heavy water and he panicked. And so he had to send messages back through the resistance to retrieve them from his home that was Gestapo occupied. I thought, that's a wild story. And part of me knew that it wasn't probably entirely true, right? There were probably elements of it, elements that were true and elements that had just gotten expanded or blurred over time. And I thought, I need to use that. I need to find a way to use that. So this unintended thing became this intentional thing. I ended up in another library, the library of McMaster University, where I'd gone to school, and I had an alumni library card. And now I needed to find a biography of Bohr. And I ended up in the 5th floor of that library, which sort of felt like where books went to die because it was very dusty and it had those electronic shelves that if you just pressed the button and you didn't get in and out in time, you felt like you were going to get squashed like a bug. Again, very exciting. Libraries are very exciting for me. And I got a biography, but then I also wanted to get some other material that he'd written, which meant I had to go back to the engineering library, into the bowels of the engineering library, like sort of this cavernous bottom floor, and find those writings. And that brought me up against my own history, because I had, at the beginning of my university career, much against to my parents' dismay, and even against the advice of a high school teacher, had gone into engineering. I had the marks for it, and I just thought I wanted to try it. But at the time I went into engineering, I was one of about 3-4 women in a program that had over 200 male students. And I can't blame my disastrous year in engineering on anything other than, a whole bunch of other things that were going on in my life. But there was no doubt about it that I came up against ways of teaching and an environment that was so masculine that was hard for me to find a way into. And just as an example, even though it wasn't a prerequisite in the university course, there was a drafting class. Everybody in my class had done like 3 to 4 years of high school drafting, and I'd never done any drafting. And it was just, my level of proficiency was so far behind everybody else's that it was just such a stumbling block. I remember that, the horrible moment where I was just erasing and erasing and erasing lines. I couldn't get a straight line for my life. So all of that kind of emotional stuff around school and science and sort of being frustrated or thwarted in something, came back and circled back to my character, Ellen. And that's when I made the decision to make her a physics teacher, to make her somebody who couldn't be quite as great in her, or couldn't, or feel that she couldn't be as great in her aspirations as the theoretical physicist Niels Bohr and the people that were around him. And by circling back and making her that and making that part of the story, I also was able to connect her parents to him by making her parents Danish and her father a Danish designer who'd come to America, and possibly they would have connected with Bohr, and her having a sense of some kind of familial other connection with him, which made her feel close to him. And then him being able to introduce her to the idea of the female physicists that were in his orbit, who've been forgotten largely in some, by history, and their contributions have been sort of forgotten. And that becomes also a part of Ellen's story and the way she's negotiating truth and belief. So I thought the first thing I would do tonight is do a quick reading about Ellen. It's sort of part of her backstory, dealing with her, just dealing with her frustrations and her thwarted ambitions around becoming a theoretical physicist. So here we go. In the final year of her undergraduate degree, Ellen's theoretical physics professor, Mark Higgs, asked her to pick up her paper in his office. If only her sister and her brother could see her, she thought, as she ran up the stairwells to the physics department. That's what she wanted. Her success witnessed. Come in, he said, sit down. In his expression, she read contained excitement. Her forehead cramped with gratitude. He's impressed. He wanted to ask her about her thought process. It had taken so long for something good to happen. She was going to soak up every detail of this encounter. The book spines behind his desk that leaned at different angles in drunken cuneiform, the underwatered spider plant, its brown tipped pups loosed down the window length, the smells of unwashed floors, perspiration, burnt coffee. In one corner of his desk, the turkey mustard sandwich that sat open, its yellow-pink nakedness curing in the dry heat, as if you were about to add mayo or lettuce. And him, wearing a jacquard sweater, stretched wide at the crew neck, worn at the elbows, his face with its wry, anemic benevolence behind smudged eyeglasses. A possibly good-looking man, had not his preoccupations rhymed him. Early onset shabby, Meta called it. What are your plans after graduation? Asked Professor Higgs. Arrival. Finally, she drew in a breath. There was a new flutter in her chest. She hadn't considered he might offer to supervise her graduate work or recommend her to another program, a prestigious one. Surely he expected her to take herself seriously. Ellen surveyed the office again, telling herself, I will be spending a lot of time here. Journal papers, funding proposals, hypotheses, collaborative proofs. She'd eaten up his lectures, could quote verbatim the stories he told. He noticed the turkey sandwich. His face flushed. He covered its innards with the top bread slice, rewrapped and bagged it with a controlled precision. She recognized as a feint for impatience. You have a small child, Miss Henriksen. Right, so moving out of state will be difficult. The years and privations of graduate work, more difficult still. I'll figure it out. I'm resourceful, she said. The brakeless locomotion of her future headed straight for her. He pushed back from his desk, folded his brow, pulled in his chin so it layered against his neck. They're destined to be friends. She'd make fun of his corporal origami. Have you considered that undergraduate work might be enough for you? Ellen drew in a sharp breath. The room had a sudden din. A phone rang unanswered in the graduate office next door. The hallway photocopier Word, awake, began an allegoric click and slide. Letters of acceptance. Laughter volleyed down the hallway. Someone was being congratulated. She'd not heard him properly. I want to be a theoretical physicist, she said. His mouth twitched as if she'd administered a small electric shock. We all do. I'm a very hard worker, Professor, very determined. You are. I've seen both. These are estimable traits. That's why I wanted to talk to you. He looked around the office, as if he could find an aid, a diagram that would dig him out of this moment. His eyes landed on her body. Not a sexual look, the way he took her in. No, he studied her as if he'd found a specimen, the very thing he needed, right in front of him all along. Physicists are like gymnasts, he said. You take a group of gymnasts, all young, most of them will work hard, expect to compete at an elite level. but only a few will make it. Hard work and ambition, yes, they are required, but it's not enough. An elite gymnast has a genetic predisposition, a body type, innate flexibility, which, recognized early, exploited with all the right attention, at the right time, will blossom. Most elite physicists are the same. Somebody notices something early about them and supplies that attention. I'm guessing that hasn't been your experience, Miss Henriksen. Did I fill my paper, Professor? No, you did okay, but just okay. The last word landed like a life sentence. Ellen shifted in her chair. She'd left bets in the cafeteria with a young woman, a polymath on a full scholarship, whom she met in her biological physics seminar, and who had informed Ellen with a preferred sibling's assurance that among her many exuberant talents was a natural connection to children. They were eating tater tots and building bridges with takeout coffee cups when Ellen, en route to Higgs' office, glanced back. I've sacrificed a lot to be here, to do this degree, Ellen said. She wondered if he could raise a small child alone while paying the bills, completing advanced thermodynamics, and submitting an okay contemporary interpretations of quantum mechanics paper on time, after working into the morning's wee hours at a downtown bar. She wondered if he was the kind of man who would call a woman flighty and never be able to see her any other way, even if it turned out she not only had a genetic predisposition for the subject, but the very best kind. She might have told him, had he gained her trust, that bloodlines tied her to the best generation of physicists, who were also the most destructive so far. He pulled himself back to his desk, leaned on his elbows, softened his expression, so it read like a sympathy card blandishment. My sincerest condolences. She noticed the flakes of dandruff along the part of his hair, the faintly anxious hue of his skin, the deep labial ruts of his smile. Have you considered teaching? At the secondary level? I'd be happy to write a reference letter for you. There are so few women teaching physics in high school. What a role model you'd be. And think you could give that extra attention to someone who doesn't yet realize the level of her own talent. Ellen stood up. Her chair skittered backward. Thank you, but I don't need a reference to go to teacher's college. Professor Higgs stood also, held out his turkey mustard hand to shake. She imagined the nitrate tingle of luncheon meat and mustard's waning pungency on his palm. She nodded, but did not extend hers. So that is Ellen, a little taste of her own backstory. My final idea is attention, is this notion of attention, and how one of the ways that that I like to build character, and a lot of writers like to build character and just be, is sort of having the characters pay attention to a lot of small things in their universe. Ellen pays an inordinate amount of attention to objects in her life, a mirror that's gone, a small dental mirror that's gone broken, the design of a chair that her father sort of gained a cult-like status around. But she also struggles to pay attention to the things she's going through, the kind of pain she feels. And by failing to pay attention to that, as a mother, though she's a loving mother and a caring mother, she can be inattentive to her own daughter's needs. So I thought I would read another passage, and thank you so much for your indulgence, about that, and then I'll just talk very quickly afterwards. So this passage is, in this passage, Ellen's daughter, Bets, has had, she's had something go on at the bar where she's gone out for a night, and she's had something go on. She's gotten into some trouble at a bar, at a club. And in the next morning, Ellen is sort of cleaning up and thinking about the implications for their lives of what Bets has done and how that's going to affect her. Ellen empties a dustpan and imagines an entitled girl from a rich suburb where a mom and dad may be friends with a Republican governor, the same one who is systematically gutting funding for inner city education, a girl with a once delicate nose forever misshapen by a punch, or a jaw that needs wiring. Other than this stranger named Kurt, no one had seen what had happened to Bets. But the girl taking the punch, all her friends were witnesses. This house. Ellen's regretted the sharply gabled, workmanlike Queen Anne almost as long as she's owned it, believing it was the first of many she'd have. Perhaps a cream brick Federalist 3-story in Brewer's Hill was next, to an open concept loft in the Third Ward's historic warehouses. Over 15 years on a punitive schedule, she paid off a second mortgage, the one that financed her degree, the degree that was supposed to make their lives bigger. Now she's ready to do it again, for bets. The refused scholarship hurt, though, the space between Ellen's eyebrows cramped thinking about it. There'll be no next house. The Lily once told Ellen that a home was something you have a relationship with. It's possible to love it more than members of your family. I go to sleep in a Frank Lloyd Wright house and wake up in one, the Lily said. It doesn't matter to me if anyone knows it or not. In fact, it had mattered. Ellen overheard Aunt Petrine yell out at a dinner party. They'd all gotten drunk and vicious, that the Burnham Avenue houses were part of an ill-fated partnership between Wright and a Milwaukee developer to create a low-cost suburb on the outskirts of the Old South Side. The company, American System-built homes, went bankrupt after only 5 houses were complete. Prefab kit houses were beneath Wright. Her aunt said, her tannin-stained lips wet and vulpine. Besides, his neighborhood is getting dangerous. Her mother uninvited Petrine to the next holiday dinner. But not before Petrine dropped by North Bremen and said only, solid, affordable, it'll keep you dry. Ellen's still paying off the bathroom. The backyard needs landscaping. She's ignoring the slight lift in the roof tiles at the right corner, the eaves leak. Now she wishes she'd loved it more. We could lose it all, Ellen thinks. Even a small life can shatter. Did you get your purse back from the bar? Bets is eating a bowl of milk-soggy cereal. Her lip and eye are crusted. One side of her face is mottled yellow-purple, green-brown. Despite being underappreciated, the house is generous with sunlight. The kitchen fills with the soft heat of early summer. You might get your friend Maya to call for you. Bets gives her mother a baleful look. Nobody takes a purse to a club, Mom. I had everything I needed in my skirt pockets. I lost my house key and my fake ID. Ellen crosses her arms. No, the ID is not traceable to me, in case you're wondering. Relieved, still worried, Ellen tries to be cheerful. She wants to ask Bets if she needs to talk through what happened, if she's angry or disappointed or newly afraid. But her thoughts keep getting sucked inward to the gyre of causality, a mother's nemesis. Did Bets work in a bar because Ellen had? Had those few guilty glasses of wine when she was pregnant led them here? And what about the freezing February night when Bets teethed with pugilistic rage and a desperate, exhausted Ellen dipped her soother in gin? Her own mother gave them bright water when it still contained alcohol. Poor parenting's damning epigenesis. Paradoxically, this makes her want to yell at her daughter, how dare you risk everything? A glance at her phone tells her she can make her second period class. Principal Pete's reproachful mouth, the impatient foot tapper to be avoided. Can you call a friend to stay with you today, hun? For a fleeting instant, someone smaller and hurt stares out through Bets's eyes. As quickly, her daughter retreats behind the drawn bow of a pained smile. Sure, Mom. She may need space, Ellen tells herself. This new Bets is someone she barely knows. So that's that. That's a little bit of Bets and Ellen. So this final idea of attention is super important in, I think, reading and writing. And so if I can give you 3 tips for the way that you look at your own summer reading challenge, it would be this. Find something with some tension. Find something that makes you, that's outside of what your algorithm is feeding me. I have a great algorithm. It really knows me. But it circumscribes, it circumscribes the ideas that it's going to give to me because it thinks it knows everything I want. And that's an amazing thing about the digital world, but there's all this availability. So I sort of force myself out of that by always asking for recommendations from people who I know are reading in a completely different way than me. And sometimes that makes me read things that I wouldn't necessarily come to naturally, but it's great. It expands my world. So tension, find some tension in your reading. Then with intention, do that with intention, but also leave space for the unintended, for the complete accidents. Some of the most memorable reading that I've done is just picking up a book while I'm traveling that somebody's discarded. I had no intentions of reading this, but it's like an accident. And sometimes it's so wonderful and it can be so memorable. So pick up the completely felicitous book, the thing that you don't usually expect to read, and just be transported. And then the final thing is attention. I think in this moment in Canada, one of the things we need to do is listen, is to give our full attention. The wonderful sort of spiritual writer Simone Weil said that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. So I just wanted to bring to your attention that tomorrow is a listening day. 400 radio stations, including the CBC, are doing all Indigenous-led programming. They're going to be, there's going to be residential school survivors telling their stories. And I think listening to stories as well as reading them is really important. So I encourage you to do all of those things. And thank you for listening to me. And